Dragon's Dogma 2 is an attempt to make an open-world RPG, with so much content to experience and interesting activities to partake in while traveling that the developers hope the player won't miss the lack of fast travel. Did the developers achieve that goal? It will be something I'll be coming back to many times to discuss. One of the issues I have when making this video is that I have three issues while making this video. One, I have ADHD, so I need to read from a script. Two, I have dyslexia, so I misread the script. And three, I'm just really not that interested in talking about Dragon's Dogma. It's been about a week, probably, since this review should have come out, maybe even a week and a half. By the time this review comes out, I'm sure many people will no longer care about the game. But I figured, you know what, let's just talk about Dragon's Dogma 2 anyway, because the more I thought about it, the more mad I got at this game. Is Dragon's Dogma 2 an enjoyable experience? I have 40 hours in the game and completed it, even the secret ending, so I'm neither the man with 2 hours who never got to truly experience the game, and I am neither the man with 2,000 hours who burnt out on the game and tells everyone, this is a terrible game, don't play it. Depending on when in my playtime you asked me if I thought it was a good game, I'd have different answers for you every time. So for this video, I'm going to summarize my experience as well as talk generally about what the game does well and what it does not do well. Did I think it was a good game? While making this video, I've double checked everything I've said. Did the developers call Dragon's Dogma 2 open world? Yes, they did. I checked interviews to make sure that they said it. Did they also hope that people wouldn't miss fast travel? Yes, again, they did say that. But the second thing is more of a hope. It's a goal. It's not something they promised that would be in the game, factually. It was a design intent. A design intent isn't a lie. It's not something that we can come out and we can say, you lied to us, you deceived us. We can say you clearly missed your goal and you did not achieve it, but I don't think that attacking people unfairly for that is well, it's not a fair thing to do. I'm saying this because lately a lot of Bethesda-oriented YouTubers have begun to preach absolute unverified nonsense in the hopes an angry comment section will propel their videos towards success. I hope that this video does not feel like an angry man espousing hateful comments in front of a torch-wielding mob using underhanded lies and half-truths for attention, but rather, I'm just someone who enjoys video games talking about a video game to other people who enjoy video games. The introduction is a bit long, I suppose, but I felt I needed to make it because of how many lies have been spread about Dragon's Dogma 2. It is not a beloved game, but I don't intend to use some misconceptions about it to sit on a soapbox preaching hate. With that said, we need to discuss the on-release DLC, the microtransactions. Not a single one of those microtransactions cannot be obtained in-game. Every single one of them can be obtained in-game. They will make the game easier slightly, but this is not a particularly hard game to begin with. I do believe that the more people that get mad at on-release microtransactions, the more people that get mad at that, the better the games industry will be for people like me. Because people like you might get mad at them, and then if you get mad enough, they might not do that practice anymore. And then I will benefit from it. So even if I want to sit on my high horse and I want to say, let's not talk about that, I'm going to take the high ground, I'm secretly hoping that all of you continue to get angry about it, because if you do, I'm going to directly benefit. With that said, I'm not going to discuss the microtransactions any further because I want to discuss purely the gameplay of the game, and that's all. Okay, the game is not optimized very well, and it is in fact very laggy in the opening tutorial area. Worse yet, my opening footage, my initial footage of the tutorial is gone because it crashed my entire PC and I lost the recording. The frame rate was choking for air, and I was legitimately considering refunding the game just in the tutorial because my PC seemed to be struggling to run it, and I have a pretty good PC. I endured, however, and continued on to my journey into whatever the name of the world of this game is. I don't remember the name of the world of this game because the story was not immersive, it was stupid, and it was quite shallow. After you get out of the tutorial area, everything improves. The frame rate improves, the crashing goes away, everything seems to get better. There does seem to be a problem with the tutorial area, which is where many of these complaints come from. But I'm not going to focus on the crashing, I'm not going to focus on the FPS issues, because the only other area that seemed to have this problem, the only area with this problem, was cities. The primary problem here, it seems to be NPCs. The more NPCs you have around you, the more the game lags. It doesn't seem to deal with them a lot. To be honest, It made me start to miss Skyrim instant cities, because at the very least in Skyrim, where the cities were instanced, they didn't lag all the area around them. There are 2 capitals in the game, and both of them kind of destroy the FPS of anything when you're around it. Okay. Once you get out of the tutorial, that's where the game thrusts many different gameplay elements onto the player. I'll try to describe them well enough so you guys can get on the same page I'm on, and we can all understand this game together. The most important starting concept is your vocation. Your vocation is your class. I'm going to call vocation class from now on, because vocation is a stupid word just trying to differentiate itself for absolutely no reason from the rest of the industry. Your vocation is your class. So there are 4 starting classes: fighter, mage, thief, and archer. Anyone who plays video games probably understands the general idea here. The fighter wields a shield, is hard to kill, and is less mobile, although he can still do pretty good damage. The mage is a damage-dealing support character who heals up and buffs allies mostly. The thief is a damage-dealing rogue who should probably have just been called rogue. He deals a lot of damage, he moves quickly, and he's not as squishy, or sorry, he's much squishier than the fighter. The archer is an archer. They shoot with the bow. You can swap your class freely whenever you go back to a city or any area with a vocation guide, class guide, whatever it is. You can change them very easily, very freely, so your class isn't locked into you. That's important to know. Okay. After you leave the starting area, you quickly pick up 2 classes that you probably felt were missing: the warrior and the sorcerer. This fleshes out the 4 starting classes and gives people more what they would expect. The warrior has a 2-handed weapon and deals massively damaging yet slow attacks. It's what I played the most on my run. The sorcerer is a damage-dealing spellcaster who doesn't do much to help their allies, but instead just deals a lot of damage to enemies. I'm sure many of you, when you heard that I said the mage was a support healing character, you said, uh-oh, are you telling me I don't have a damage mage? No, I assure you, you do. It's just called sorcerer. There are 4 more classes in the mid to late game, bringing the total up to 10. I won't describe every single class, but the last 4 classes are hybrid classes that tried to be a bit more complicated. Classes have 10 levels. They're pretty fleshed out. Each class has 4 powerful class effects, such as the fighter can use his shield to parry, and the warrior takes dust damage when they're charging up an attack. You get many attacks / abilities. Fighter, for example, has 23 by level 10, including the master ability. You can use 4 abilities at a time. Do remember, though, that each class only has 10 levels, and you start at level 1, so you can only level up each class 9 times. As you start the game, you create your main pawn. Now, your pawn is, I'm going to call it your companion, your side character, the guy who sits around you. In most RPGs, they will be fleshed out characters with a story, backstory, something you can work with. In this game, you will find absolutely none of that, in fact. You can have up to 3 pawns active with you, and those are your companions. Your main pawn, you make yourself. He levels up with you. He has a class. You can choose any of the 6 main classes for him. He has items that you need to get him, and he looks exactly like how you want to. And he can have any personality you want. He will always be loyal and by your side. Unfortunately, the personalities are extraordinarily bland. I rarely noticed much of a difference between them, and this system, although nice in theory, kind of didn't really pan out, which we'll get into later. The secondary pawns you hire from the rift stones throughout the map. They will not level up with you, and you will need to replace them at steady intervals. This means if you hire a secondary pawn, your 3rd and 4th companion, at level 5, and you level up to 10, you'll have to get rid of that pawn and get a new pawn that is actually level 10. This obviously causes you to be detached from the characters, and, well, I mean, I'll talk about this in a second, but boy, this really, really hurts the game. Higher level pawns cost more resources to hire, so if I'm level 10, a level 12 pawn will cost more to hire. A level 15 pawn will cost even more to hire. Any pawn that is level 10 or below will be free to hire. All of these secondary pawns are made by other players, and you can check if other players gave them proper gear, abilities, or items before hiring them. So you can make sure I'm hiring a mage properly spec'd for healing, and they will buff my weapons with fire, and they will give me good healing. If I'm getting a sorcerer, I can check, do you have the overpowered sorcerer abilities? If I have a tank character, I can make sure, did your creator actually give you proper gear that you can actually soak up enough hits? Okay. So you have your class, you have your main companion, and you've probably hired 2 other companions. You head out in the world to do some combat. Now, I actually found the combat to be very fun and enjoyable. The enemies react pleasantly to your attacks, you hit an enemy, the damage feels about right, and you aren't overloaded with stupid, tedious fights. You don't fight 5 goblins into 5 goblins into 5 goblins. You feel about what actually does feel like a right amount of fights. The enemies feel very good to hit. They can hit you back for some decent damage. You hit them for good damage. It actually just feels really good. Start, middle, and end. I actually felt there were few lapses where the combat felt tedious or annoying to get through. So, right as you do your first bits of combat, you get some gold, you get some XP, you buy some upgrades to your weapon and armor, and you start doing quests. Everything still feels pretty good and right. The game only has one save, much like, let's say, Dark Souls, Elden Ring type situation, so it auto-saves any actions you take. Now, the difference is you can't lose XP, you can't lose money, you can't lose items. If you use all your revives, then you die for real. It will reload the save and you'll have all your revives back. This isn't a situation like Dark Souls where if you use an item then die, that you still lose that item. Failure merely means restarting at a previous save, which is annoying at worst. When you visit your first real town, you get introduced to the plot. Many concepts are literally never explained and weirdly rely on you knowing Dragon's Dogma 1. It relies on you having already played that game to know them. Many things are just straight up not talked about. They're just talked at you like you already know what's going on. It's not that big a deal though, as so far it doesn't really impact the game. The plot also seems to be very boring and uninteresting, so I'm sure many people probably skip past as much as they can and don't really care about it. All it does is get in the way of the fun combat. As you leave on your first journey out into the world, the game doesn't quite tell you what to do, just where to go. And it's fun, really fun. The corridors, it might seem like an open world, but there are corridors to each area. You go through a pass. The combat stays pretty basic as you're new to the game. So at this point, I'm probably showing on screen some pretty basic combat. Don't take that to be the higher level combat. The combat is fun and very enjoyable. The combat does take a turn, however, when you fight your first large monster. Looney Tunes combat is how I would describe the first large enemy fight. It hits you and you go flying. You jump on it and try to stab it in the brain. You try to knock it off balance, pull its legs out from under it, and generally you have an amazingly fun time. Some of you might see it and think it looks done, but the first few fights I had against large enemies, I had a ton of fun. I continued to have fun fighting these enemies for the most part until the late game. I jump on an enemy's arm, he does a swing up punch, he punches me into the distance, my character crawls around like he's been very injured by this. It's hard to describe, but it very much actually is fun, especially with you and your 3 companions. It feels much like the Mines of Moria, which I'll talk about later, when everyone is fighting the troll together. You and your fellowship are fighting the trolls. However, when I said you will have fun fighting these enemies until the end of the game, I meant that part literally. You will be fighting the same large enemies the entire game. Ogres and Cyclops form the most common large enemy types and never stop happening. At first, it's an event fight, part of the main story. Then you can get a Cyclops and a quest fight, and then there are enemies that just start rarely appearing, and then they're just sort of randomly strewn throughout the entire map, and then they're just appearing every 5 minutes. Only these 2, however, will occur everywhere, and will form the majority of all large enemy combat all game. Ogres and Cyclops. Remember that, ogres and Cyclops. I'm sure I will say those words less than I had to fight them. This is to say the enemy diversity is not very good. For all my other complaints, I wanted to wait until I talked about the game more, but this is the first time I can say with certainty that I did not realize early on that this was basically all the large enemy types you will experience. Are the small enemies better and more diverse? Well, no, actually. When your merry band finally reaches the main capital of the zone, you'll find out a lot. Mostly, you'll find out that your FPS is going to start choking again. It's not exactly wonderful. You will start walking into the city and you'll go, oh, in fact, in my footage, I had to cut out segments where I literally started to check my settings because it just felt like, wait, did I accidentally do something wrong? Why is the game chugging along so hard? If you're like me, you'll also notice another glaring issue with the game. There's a gray filter applied over everything. If you notice a slight difference in the video from the beginning footage to the more footage, probably maybe 5 or 10 minutes in, it's because I turned the brightness up. The sun shining over golden wheat fields felt way darker than it really should have been. I tried to turn the brightness up and it didn't work. It looked a little better, but it still felt like everything was in a weird shadow, even with the sun shining right on it. So you enter the city. You have done the tutorial. You have done the starting zone. You've gone to your first town. That town instructed you to go to this city. So you go out into the world and you have fun combat and you fight big monsters and you do all this stuff, right? And you're actually enjoying your time, and you go into the big city. You buy new items with the gold you've equipped, you upgrade your abilities, and you're treated to the continuing of the magnificently forgettable crap that is the plot. It's not very obvious as far in that the plot is going to disappoint you in more ways than you can imagine. For now, though, the game probably looks exciting and full of wonder. Your feeling will continue, and when you set out, you'll start exploring the world and maybe even forgetting the plot if you are so lucky. You might even start thinking to yourself, boy, this is starting to remind me of that experience, that feeling you got in other open world RPGs, maybe Skyrim, maybe Elden Ring. You don't really know. It's a wide open world full of adventure. The first time it begins to be night, you'll see zombies, skeletons, ghosts. You'll keep finding new enemy types. The new content never stops, and then it totally stops. And you don't realize it yet, but that's basically it. The boring pawn system sucks all the life out of what could be an adventure with memorable characters. You don't need massive enemy diversity to have a memorable game. If your secondary pawns were more fleshed out, then maybe you could feel that it was you and your friends and you were out in, I don't know, Lord of the Rings. Again, I like to use the example of everyone ganging up on the troll in the Mines of Moria if you've watched that movie. It's fun. It's exciting. Everyone's trying to climb on top of the enemies. Everyone's trying to cast spells, heal each other. You're a group, you're buddies, but you're not, because you will continuously replace your third and fourth characters, and they will continue to spam the same catchphrases, and they do not have any memorable personalities. And I'm going to be honest, I found them quite annoying. The idea that you're doing Fellowship the Ring except with cardboard cutouts becomes frustrating. This could have been an epic adventure game with you and 3 friends taking down enemies, but instead 2 of them are totally replaceable, none of them have any personality, and the entire thing just sucks. Ogres, cyclops, undead, goblins, some sort of wolf, and an annoying flying creature. That's about 95% of your adventure, and I'm not joking. If you watched me stream this game, you would see me play for 20 hours straight, where that was basically every single enemy I fought. Except for about 5% of enemies, I would say that's it, really. Goblins fill the road. At night, it will be undead, fill the road. Ogres and cyclops will randomly spawn. Sometimes you see a wolf. There's generally, for some reason, often very many annoying flying creatures. They all play about the same. Some of them have some different abilities. There's only about 3 or 4 of them, but yeah, that's about it. And that's fine on its own, really. Again, I'm going to continue to compare this to Lord of the Rings because that's kind of the feeling I got from it. If you played a Lord of the Rings game, you'd be fighting orcs the entire game, for the most part. Except it would probably be a linear game, have a story, have actual levels designed to be fun and enjoyable. Dragon's Dogma 2 has a map that's kind of linear and sort of open world, and kind of just starts making you wonder in what the game could have been. Where did all that content go? Can I experience more content? And it doesn't really seem to have a lot going for it. I visited an area with no minimap where everything was fog. It was really cool. Everything was undead. There was fog. You could see that, again, the minimap was blocked out. You had to navigate your way through it, and it was very fun. Then, in the middle of the zone, on an island that I could only reach by a bridge, was a lich, another large enemy boss monster. And I realized I had already fought a lich earlier outside at the graveyard, almost directly outside that area. That would have been more forgivable, except I started to notice just how starved for anything to do the game actually was. These were the same undead I had fought at night, leading to the same enemy I had fought earlier at a graveyard. I thought it was a cool boss, and I thought, well, I only fought him twice, but boy, I'm really starting to feel like the drip feed of content is very, very small. By this point, I'd started to play for over 10 hours, and I'd fought 4 different big enemy types, and I knew there were 6. That was kind of starting to worry me, and it should worry anyone who's playing a game like that. Almost every big enemy you fight is ogres and cyclops. I'm gonna keep saying it, ogres and cyclops. That seems to form the overwhelming majority of everything you fight. Which sucks. What exactly was the game there for? It was the combat was amazing. The exploration was not that great, but it was there. But what does it exactly want you to do? It started to be a very confusing game, and at this point, I think most people realize that exploration is not that rewarding. That you should just probably continue the main story, and that by going around and exploring, you're just going to continue to see the same mobs. Maybe you'll pick up an item for a class that you don't even want to play, and then it gets even worse when you realize, after everything I just told you about, I'd wager there are about 3 interesting areas I have not described yet. There was the Sphinx, there was the Gorgon, and there was an underground mountain pass. Other than that, everything else is basically related to the main story, or is just a random dungeon that will feature the same enemies with the same boss. The boss will be one of the large enemies you've already fought. It will reward you with an item. Items in this game are quite boring, to be clear. None of them have passives, none of them have actives, none of them really seem to do much of anything at all. The rings are quite boring, everything is boring. I want to say, when you start getting about halfway through the game, you're starting to think to yourself, what is happening here? Because you're bored. You're like, oh man, we can find new enemies. I accidentally skipped both the Sphinx and the Gorgon, because by the time I was in the second zone to actually find them, I had explored the entire first zone. I had found there was fog. I found a single chimera, and I found an elven village. The elven village, I didn't really see any point to that. It was cool, I guess. The fog was neat, but it just had the same boss you could find outside at the graveyard. And that was it. The chimera was kind of cool. I appreciated the chimera, but boy, oh boy, oh boy. I'm now going to list throughout the entire game every single big enemy type. This includes every boss. This includes any enemy that will spawn throughout the world. This will list every single big enemy type in the game. Every quest ending, every dungeon boss, every main story enemy, everything. You will fight Cyclops, Ogre, Minotaur, Dullahan, Griffin, Lich, Medusa, Chimera, Drake, Golem, Gorgon, and Sphinx. There has been for a while a misconception that both a Gorgon and a Medusa are in the game. To give you guys a bit of a Greek history lesson, a Medusa is a Medusa. Medusa is actually a Greek mythological character. Medusa is a Gorgon. All 3 of the Gorgons had snakes for hair and the power to turn anyone who looked at them into stone. Medusa was the Gorgon slain by Perseus in the Odyssey. This one is particularly funny because people didn't know Greek mythology, and unfairly, they started counting both Gorgon and Medusa because some people thought that that was 2 different things. And some people said we found a Gorgon, and some people said we found a Medusa, and they said, wow, there must be 2 different bosses in the game. No, it's just the one. Medusa was a Gorgon. There were 12 bosses, to be clear. There are 12 different types of large enemies throughout the game. You will clear a dungeon and sometimes find the same ogre you've killed 15 times that day as the end boss. You will probably not be happy. So are the rewards for exploring good then? Can you get good rewards from dungeons and feel happy? This one is a bit complicated to answer, and from here on out, I'm going to go full on spoiler mode just to describe how much the end of the game rubbed me the wrong way. I think at this point I'm going to go a bit off script because I'm filled with hatred just thinking about how the end of the game went. Now, again, this is full spoilers, but there's not much to spoiler because this game's plot is terrible. Let me be clear on something. the second you beat a Drake, that is the toughest enemy in the entire game. All that work you do upgrading your gear, all that work you do upgrading your armor, your rings, your weapon, getting upgrades onto that equipment, it will all be wasted if you can already beat a Drake. The second you do that, that is, I promise you, that is literally the toughest enemy in the game. Even the final boss is about as tough as a Drake, but it's not actually the final boss. You can reach a secret ending in the game. It's kind of hammered into you that there's a secret ending. It's not very subtle. The main villain will repeatedly send you back in time, and he will basically beg you to find the secret ending. Now, once you do the secret ending, the game opens again, and once again, it actually feels like a really cool, interesting game. And this is the point I love the game. See, what it does is it puts it into a post-game scenario. The enemies start being a bit tougher. They spawn the higher-end versions of most of the boss mobs. Instead of fighting the Minotaur, you will fight the Gore Minotaur. Instead of fighting the Ogre, you will fight the Gore Ogre. I don't know if it's actually called that, but this is basically the pattern here. It's the same boss, called differently, maybe recolored, maybe with some different textures. That's about it. The same 12 bosses are the only ones here, okay? But it will feel new. And here's, oh boy, here's where you will be amazed. When you go out into the world, you'll find in the post-game scenario, in the secret ending, that you need to save the world. And I'm not going to talk about it too much, but you will find that there are points of entry where you will need to go to stop a Drake invasion. And you'll find that there's two different kinds of Drakes that can start to invade. The first one you fight, you'll think, oh my god, that's a different kind of Drake. He needs to be beaten differently. I can't use the same tactic I used before. It will still be a Drake. It will still have a Drake health bar, but it will have different weak points. It will have a different animation at some points. It will have a different model. And I struggle to think whether or not I should have counted this as one of the 12 end bosses, particularly because of how confusing it is. It's only about as difficult as a regular Drake to beat, so if you've beaten a regular Drake and you've upgraded your gear, then you are well past the point of this being a real challenge. You'll beat the first different type of Drake, then you'll beat the second different type of Drake, and that's it. That is quite literally it. But it gets worse. All those items I talked about, all that upgrading I talked about, everything I talked about, this is still all for naught. You see, every time you advance the plot, every time you enter a new town, you get new higher tier items that you can buy. So long as you farmed up properly, so long as you have enough gold, you can always find the best items on vendors. All that exploring you do out in the world is basically all for naught. Every so often you can find an item that might be good for your class out there in the world, but the upgrade will be very slight and insignificant compared to an item you can find on a vendor, and most of the time it won't even be for your class. Remember, there are 10 classes, and each class has items locked into that class. Now, I am going somewhere with this because you will probably find this just as amazing as I did as to how much of an absurdity this was, how much of a stupidity this was, okay? When you go to the post-game content and you beat your first Drake, you will get resources from that Drake. You can take that Drake back to the main hub of the post-game content and buy a full set of armor of quality higher than anything you could get in the main plot. And when you kill the second Drake, you can go buy a weapon with higher quality than anything you can get in the main plot. Both these Drakes are only about as difficult as a regular Drake to beat. From here on out, there's no new content in the entire game. It will repeat the first Drake, then it will repeat the second Drake, and then the game will end. If you had enough Dragon's Blood, if you had enough Drake's Blood before getting into the post-game content, you could actually just open it up and instantly buy better gear. So what was the purpose of gearing up the entire game? The second I beat a Drake, the second anyone beats a Drake, that's the hardest the game will ever get. Beating a Drake is quite difficult, I will admit. At least I struggled with it. But realistically, I mean, to put this in a way, it's not really that hard. I mean, so long as you have a sorcerer companion, they'll chunk most of its health off. I mean, I suppose you could not use a sorcerer. You could not use a rogue. You could not use anything good. You could try to only use late game warriors to make it difficult, like this is Dark Souls and you're trying to intentionally hamper yourself. But I find most people realistically are not going to struggle bus that much once they get late game gear to be able to brute force kill a Drake. And that's it. And the game is done. You'll complete your gear set with gear that you basically just get for free just because you beat these drakes. So what are you gearing up for? What are you doing? Is there an end game challenge? Have you finally unlocked the secret post game mega bosses? No, those were the secret post game mega bosses. I don't know how to describe this in a way that you would actually find believable, but I assure you, the last boss in the game is beat in a cutscene, entirely in a cutscene. You never fight him even once. All that gearing you did, all that upgrading you did, preparing for some final boss with the god of the world, you do not do. It is all done in a cutscene. You will not swing at them a single time. You will not do anything a single time. There is no boss. There is a cutscene, and you kill God in the cutscene, and that's the end of the game. And I have to wonder, it left me feeling amazing. I've never felt so stupid. I thought to myself, why? Once I beat a Drake, why did I gear? Why did I upgrade my weapon? Why did I upgrade my armor? Why did I think it was worth it to go out in the world and find these upgrade components? I did more damage, my numbers were higher, but what was the point of any of this? I was done with the game. This is fundamentally, this is an RPG. In games like Skyrim, enemies will level scale with you, so you do have to continuously try at least to make your character stronger. You will reach a point where your character is strong enough, but it will take you a long time to do that. In games like Elden Ring, the last bosses in the game will chuck at you impossible challenges for anyone who doesn't practice a lot or is equipped. People will say, I can beat Elden Ring at level 1 with no items. Sure, but those last bosses truly do, for your average player, for me, for 90% of people, those last bosses truly do require you to have been preparing for them, okay? Dragon's Dogma 2 has none of that. It has absolutely none of that. It has no final boss. It has no Sephiroth. It has nothing. You do not fight against the elder brain. None of this. I promise you, none of this. There's no challenge, nothing. Once you beat a Drake in the normal game mode, it is done. That is the final challenge, and that's it. There was one point in the game, there was one point entirely where I had so much fun, even after it had kind of dawned on me what was happening, that the game was not as explorable as it pretended, that it was not as open world as it pretended, that there was not nearly enough content, that there was not nearly enough enemy types. I still had fun with it at exactly one point. There was an underground passage under a mountain that we had to move through. And this was very linear, and it felt very designed by the level designers. The level designers felt like they had sculpted this path to be effectively a level from an older style of video game. And it was fun. It was really fun. I enjoyed so much going through this dungeon. It felt like the Mines of Moria. There was even an ogre in sunlight. It wasn't hard to beat at that point, but I enjoyed it. I loved it. It was so fun for me. And I thought to myself, shouldn't this have been the game? Shouldn't this have been what they were doing? That was so good. They didn't need enemy variety if they gave me that game. If they gave me that game of me and 3 companions running through these levels, that would have been fun and enjoyable. Just progressively up their health, up their damage. I don't care. Give me more challenges. Give me something. If I even have to fight the same enemy types, the combat is enjoyable enough, and I will keep saying that. The combat is enjoyable and fun enough that you will often not notice that you are fighting the same enemy for the 10,000th time. It's weird that you can fight so many enemies and just enjoy the combat, but it's just such a punch in the gut that a game that pretends to be an RPG, a game that pretends to have these weapon upgrades and all that, has no point to any of it, that all of this was a waste of time. And I can't help but feel, just make the game like you did that underground section. It was a level, it was fun. Make the game like they did that first romp in the early game, where you had to trek all the way across the forest in order to get to the first capital. There were points where the game was quite linear, and there were points where you're going campfire to campfire that the game opened up and was very enjoyable. But the complete lack of any difficulty past the early game, the complete lack of difficulty after you managed to kill your first Drake, drained it. It made the open world tedious. Eventually, you will not enjoy fighting the same goblin for the 10,000th time through the same area again. Because remember, this game has very limited fast travel. You will have to run back up through that same area, back through that same area, back through that same area, and it'll drain you. but there is a lot to like in this game. I just don't understand what game they thought they were trying to make. It seemed like they were trying to make an open world RPG. It seemed like they were trying to make a game with many caves, with many bosses, with many things, but then they didn't have the money to do it. They didn't have the budget to do it, and then they released it as a $70 game with microtransactions on it. I think if this game was $40, a bit better optimized, I think most people would very much have enjoyed this game. But you're trying to tell me that this game, with a mere 12 bosses that it will rehash over and over, with so much time that it will waste on you over and over, is a $70 game with microtransactions. There was one point in particular I was amazed. I had just done maybe 4 hours of the story, and I was hating it so much because the story was terrible. Because it was trying to make me do things like free people from a jail cell, attend a masquerade that the game clearly was not designed for, and it felt terrible to go through. I just wanted to get back to the combat. And I was amazed after 4 hours of doing all this and just wanting to go back to the combat and thinking, can I maybe just refund this game? It won't just give me what I want. One of your companions summarized everything that just happened in a singular sentence. In one sentence, and I am not joking about this, so little happens in this plot, so much time of yours is wasted, that in a singular sentence, your companion summarized everything. And I was blown away. And I thought, but they understand, right? Because the developers wrote that line. They know that all of this was a waste of my time. They know that none of this was combat. I was doing platforming. I was attending a masquerade ball. I was hiding from guards. None of this. The game wasn't designed for this. It felt so uncomfortable and bad. Why did you make me do all this if you were just going to summarize it anyway and like this was a total waste of my time? Give me more Cyclops to fight. Give me more ogres to fight. At the very least, that the game was designed for. And that's how it's described Dragon's Dogma 2. I don't understand this game. I don't understand it at all because it had such a good combat system and the level designers who worked on this game were incredible. I truly feel in my soul that the level designers for this game were absolutely incredible and they will not be appreciated for how hard they carried this game. And that's really the truth. They designed so many environments that were cool to look at. They designed so many things that were fun. They designed this underground passage that you could really feel they knew what they were doing. They knew how to make the same enemies fight different in different areas. That these enemies put in this terrain would fight differently from those same enemies put in this terrain. They knew how to do all this, but they weren't allowed to because all they were allowed to do was create linear paths from one town to another town because it pretended to be an open world game. And to be an open world game, you have to be able to travel from one town to another town in a linear path. And they can't have it be open because then the game would suck because it really wasn't that kind of game. And that's all I have to say. That is my summation of Dragon's Dogma 2. A game that I felt wasted my time. That almost, here's the thing, I think it almost got to the point where I wouldn't miss fast travel. I think I almost wouldn't miss fast travel if they stopped wasting my time and they just got to the point of the game and they realized this was not a 40-hour game, this was a 10, maybe 15-hour game. And if they wanted it to be longer, they should have given me more content. They should have given me more things to do. People will say to me, Elden Ring repeated a lot of content. And I do agree. Elden Ring repeated a lot of enemies, a lot of tile sets, a lot of bosses. But the thing is, Elden Ring made each area different. Elden Ring made it something I wanted to see. They did have more enemy variety than this game. And both of these, by the way, these are both AAA games, which is blowing my mind. Even a game like Skyrim had more enemy variety, much better level design, which is insane to say. I'm not saying Dragon's Dogma had very good level designers, some of the best I've ever seen, right? But they couldn't do anything, only in certain specific areas were they allowed to do anything. I don't think anyone will ever look at Dragon's Dogma 2 and say, I'm glad I explored all of Dragon's Dogma 2. I enjoyed all of it. I don't believe many people will say that. If any people will say that. So that's my review of Dragon's Dogma 2. A game that should have been a different game that just focused on what it was good at and stopped wasting time with anything else and just did what they were good at. We're very unlikely to see a Dragon's Dogma 3. Maybe we will. And I hope if we do, they actually get the budget to do what they want to do. This was not it. So, thank you all for watching. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, everybody. And have a great rest of your day.